from KBIA and the Reynolds Journalism Institute. On air and online, this is Intersection.
Hello and welcome to Intersection, where people and ideas meet online and on KBIA. I'm Ryan Famuliner. Some believe that learning and listening to music, particularly classical music, at a young age is tied to success in the future. In Columbia, there are many efforts to get children interested in classical music, multiple avenues for music education, and even classical music performances in town targeted at kids. Today on Intersection, we'll talk about how young people in Missouri are exposed to these influences and about some of the challenges in reaching them. Joining me in studio today, Kirk Trevor is the maestro of the Missouri Symphony Society. Kirk, welcome to Intersection.
Thank you, Ryan.
James Melton is the coordinator of the Fine Arts Department for Columbia Public Schools. James, thanks for being here.
Thank you.
And Greg Hausman is the director of the Columbia Academy of Music. Greg, thanks for joining us today.
Thanks a lot.
And for you and our audience, are your kids interested in classical music? How do you get them more involved in it over the summer? Give us a call at 573-882-8925 or email intersection@kbia.org. You can also tweet us at intersectkbia. To watch our live show online today, go to rjionline.org/live. So you all work with kids in music, some more regularly than others. So just to start off, the question, why? Why is that important for young children, particularly to be exposed to music, to classical music? Whoever wants to dive in. Everybody's looking at
I'll go first, I guess.
Let you be the master.
I think the exposure to music, what I was just reviewing some comments and some notes from parents and things that kind of pour in towards the end of the year. And the biggest thing that comes across to me about being exposed to music is that we do it for a lot of reasons. They say increased test scores and that it makes us better, doing multiple things. But I think for me, the first and foremost is that it's art. It's relevant in everything that we do. It connects us to who we are as human beings, connects us to each other. And that's not necessarily something that we're going to get just naturally if we don't allow universal exposure to it and know what's been going on, over time. So for me, the biggest thing to start with is that it's an expression of the human spirit and it's art. And I want to, pursue that and give kids that opportunity to express themselves that way.
Sure. Kurt?
Yeah, I think that, like James said, I think that it's art. The thing about music is that we have both the passive and the active element in music of being listeners or proactive performers. And I don't like to separate them even that much. I like to think of, that all of music is a proactive experience. And, obviously we're going to be talking a lot to parents in the course of this afternoon. But I think the importance of music has been proven that because of the way that music engages the brain, that it's just proven that either by listening or being proactively involved in music and that you cannot be mindless. And I think that's one of the things that I like about music is that it's a constantly active activity.
Sure. And I guess, how do you see that, I mentioned kind of really young children before too, but, as you said, people are able to actively be engaged, learning music and being able to, not expand beyond that first sheet of music that they're looking at and really like diving into an instrument and all that. So what kind of difference do you see in an individual as they get a little older and they do have this, exposure to music, I guess?
I think the danger is that we tend to mistakenly as teachers so often think that we're training musicians or we're giving lessons for people to become musicians. And in fact, I think that we have to be careful not to get into that trap of thinking that we're developing or giving lessons and teaching, and all of us, I guess, here, are well aware that 99.9% of young musicians who go on do not become musicians as professionals. But the fact that one of our best examples in the conservatory program is Mingu Kim, who is our concert master in the conservatory orchestra. He's been with us for 7 or 8 years. And he's going to Harvard in, I don't know whether it's thermonuclear biology or some extraordinary thing and he's a valedictorian at Hickman. And music has been a part of his life, and he's always accepted it. It's been one of the most important things, but it's not something he wants to do professionally. He wants to do it vocationally.
Yeah, and it's kind of a thing for children, at an early age. it's kind of an opportunity for them to like really work on a semi-long-term goal. You know what I mean? Like, I'm going to learn this instrument and actually play this performance at a certain date coming up in several months or something like that. It's, a certain discipline develops there, which is nice. But, for me, the big thing is just like, I like to teach because I feel like it's a really positive thing that people can get into.
Mm-hmm.
Kind of leaving the world a better place, if you will, I guess
Sure.
is what I'm thinking there.
Sure. Well, and like you said, I mean, it is in some ways, and some of the research I've read on, whether listening to music and playing an instrument, will lead to a more active mind in the future. They also say it's the same type of person, right, that is going to be dedicated to this ritual, to spending a lot of time and learning this instrument. It's not something you're going to pick up and learn in a few hours, right? And so that seems like, I see you nodding your head over there.
No,
I mean,
not a few hours.
Yeah. And so, I mean,
Certainly.
yeah.
Exercise and dedication.
Exactly. And so, are those types of students you often find yourself working with, someone who really is able to dedicate themselves maybe more than their peers?
I think that you find that kids that want to continue or that get some sort of immediate feedback or jolt from the experience are kids that continue. But I also find myself, particularly because singing was my avenue, that's where I went with musicians, but always in support of just the greater musician culture at whole about what that process is. But I think it's those kids that go on for further study, it's because they feel a direct connection to enjoyment, enrichment. They like what they're doing, and some see it as an ultimate goal, like they want to become musicians, but others just see it as a relative part of their life kind of experience. I see it almost as an extension of, I wouldn't expect my daughter to leave elementary school without being able to read, and I don't expect her to leave elementary school without the ability to participate and read music, because it's such a vibrant part of our culture. It's how we relate and talk to people. We go to concerts, we see events, we hear music on the radio. And so even kids that don't go to that musician level, receiving that training, whether it be in an instrument or whether it be voice or some sort of avenue of participation now in the music industry that's out there in production, it's about being part of that active community. And for me, that's just really relevant right now.
And I think that for the instrumentalist that I work with, obviously, there's two elements here. One is that the students in the conservatory obviously have to play instruments that require a fair amount of money to maintain and keep and to buy in the first place. So I think that obviously parental influence is there from the beginning as in a way of support. But I again want to get back to this, remind ourselves that music isn't just about Bach and Beethoven and classical music. It is very important that we don't stereotype musicians or myself or James or Greg here as classical nerds. The fact is that I probably in the hot summer nights spend more time playing non-traditional classic than pop and new world music and every kind of music. So, I think it's important for us to say that a kid that enjoys music may be as interested in, ethnomusicology and world music and playing, South African drums as much as playing Bach on a violin.
Hey, take a moment to remind our audience this is Intersection, a program of KBIA and the Reynolds Journalism Institute. I'm Ryan Famuliner, and today we're talking about the opportunities and challenges for youth music education in Missouri. Joining us in the studio today for the conversation, Kirk Trevor is the maestro of the Missouri Symphony Society. James Melton is the coordinator of the Fine Arts Department for Columbia Public Schools, and Greg Hausman is the director of the Columbia Academy of Music. And for you and our audience, how do you think schools can educate students in music, specifically classical music? We'd like to hear what you think. Give us a call at 573-882-8925 or email intersection@kbia.org. You could also tweet us at intersectkbia. And so to get back to that idea that, this music is, for most of the students, not going to be a vocation, do parents accept that, embrace that? I mean, I'm thinking like an allegory to, the kid playing baseball, playing t-ball, right? And they think that their kid's going to be a professional someday, right? Is that a problem for musicians, young musicians' parents as well? Or, since it is an investment, right?
It is, but I think most parents realize that their kids are not going to be rich as a professional musician, whereas they might be rich as a professional baseball player.
Sure. This is true. I don't know.
Sure. I mean, I think
Craig?
they look more for that level of dedication. If the child continues to show interest and is really enjoying what they're doing, which happens in a lot of cases, then they support it because, this is bringing joy to their child. So what's wrong with that? Exactly.
Mhm.
But that's not every child, of course. A lot of, especially the younger you go, the more likely a child is to sort of lose focus or change interests very suddenly. But yeah,
Sure.
I mean, you really got to kind of, once again, put the focus back on the parents there at an early age. My experience has kind of been children at a very early age only have the experience with the music that their parents have exposed them to.
Sure.
And so that's where the limit is.
Yeah, and that I think that is the important issue about what the children have been exposed to. Obviously, I grew up in an age when the radio was actually important in people's lives, and one would hope that it would be the same today,
I
but
would
it's
hope
not.
so, yeah.
But in terms of having a radio going all day long, BBC Three was going. I mean, the amount of music I heard between the ages of 4 and 18, by the time I was in college in London, I probably heard more music than I think most musicians do in a lifetime in this country, simply because, having it on 24 hours a day and being able to listen to the great performances all the time. So, I mean, that's one area of exposure. The other, of course, is live music, taking children to live performances. And we're lucky here in Columbia that we have many, many wonderful, not only grassroots groups, but semi-pro, amateur groups that bring great music to life. And then we have the professional summer season here with the Hot Summer Nights. So there's certainly plenty of opportunities. And our focus, my focus in the summer as part of Hot Summer Nights is the family series, because we believe that the family series is the way to expose the ages, 2, 3 to, whatever. It's a great way for all ages to be in the hall together and have that experience of live music. And you can tell kids about it, but it's like that first experience of going to the baseball field or the baseball game, in St. Louis or Kansas City. Nobody forgets the first time they walk up the stairs and they see the field itself. The same in the concert hall.
And at the Hot Summer Nights performances you're talking about, sometimes you even give them a chance to get their hands dirty, right? Go up and...
I mean, we like the kids to get their hands dirty. And in fact, you'd be surprised how much the orchestra actually enjoys the letting kids conduct. I mean, it started, it used to be 10 or 12 kids would come up, and now it's more like 200, 300 kids. And so we've had to expand that section of the program. We used to play one march, and now we play like 3 marches in a row, so that the orchestra doesn't get tired of playing the same piece. But yeah, I mean, it's we want the experience of music. We want kids to experience it. But the sad thing, I think, is that we can kind of think back and have this image in the 1950s, 60s, and even the 70s of kids going to young people's concerts, whether they were called YPCs or children's concerts. But your school would go to the local hall with the local symphony orchestra, and the teachers would lecture their kids before about when to applaud and how to behave and no spitballs, and if I see any of you throw your programs, and it was always a don't do this kind of experience, and most of the kids didn't want to be there. And in my experience of young people's concerts, which I've been doing for 35 years, if you made the concert fun and enjoyable and proactively involving and engaging for the kids, then they could be educated in the midst of entertainment. Mm-hmm. The problem that has been, I think, for a lot of it is that we think education first and entertainment as a byproduct. I think it should be entertainment first and education as a very big byproduct, because the interesting thing was when I did a series of programs with MTV for Knoxville's middle school, people avoided middle school young people's concerts for obvious reasons. It was considered to be a very
Amateur.
Yes, unappreciative audience,
Sure.
In middle
Tough
school.
crowd.
And so we did
Say,
unappreciative of the classics, and we did a program with MTV in which we had a number of MTV artists actually dance, sing to classical works, and then we showed it up on the TV, and we turned the whole concert into an awards show. so that there would be different awards for the best ballet written by a Russian composer, et cetera, and we'd have different candidates, and they come out and win, get their Tony.
Mm-hmm.
And the kids couldn't actually relate to this whole concept, and they would see the MTV. So Janet Jackson actually danced to the Firebird in our program. And what was interesting, obviously the kids were enjoying the video and the game and the whole the concert format. But we were told that when the students got back to school, they remembered everything that had happened. They remembered the names of the composers, what the pieces were called, which was much more so than if we'd have told them that just as an educational program. They would have forgotten that information. But because that information came as a byproduct of entertainment, so I'm really a believer in entertaining and education being really hand in hand.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, James, I see you nodding. I wonder, too, your thoughts on just, trying to get teens, students engaged in music and in what works, I guess.
I think that's exactly the key. I mean, I hesitate to even call it entertainment. Great performance should always be rewarding and should always be enriching. And I think it's sometimes just forgetting that we participate and go out and see live performances because we find it entertaining and enriching and rewarding. And so I think it's finding those pieces, finding those things, finding those ways to communicate to students that really hook them, that get them to ask questions, to think deeper about it. Because once they start asking, they just jump off to the next thing, and they do remember, they do connect to that. And if you make it something that's rewarding for them, that's when they ask a question about, I wonder what it would be like to go get lessons or to think about playing that. How long did it take you to do that? I remember back to when I was at Lang, we had the opportunity to have, and I think it was Katarina Finch, it was a harpist that came out and was the harp for Her Majesty, and it was a neat opportunity through the concert series. She was fantastic, and what she did was spent most of her time allowing the kids to explore the harp rather than playing and doing, for the most part at the beginning, just tricks. And then played a few pieces for them, but spent so much time engaging them in what it is she did and how she did it that a lot of those kids turned around and went to the concert. They were provided opportunity to see that through the concert series for free. And then we had a couple students later that ended up taking lessons, and they were deeply engaged in it. And it wasn't stuffy, it wasn't old-fashioned, and it was really relevant to them. And so I think it's finding those ways to begin with that entertainment idea, connecting to them in real ways. That idea of an award show is a fantastic way because you didn't dumb down the music or the performance. The performance was still high caliber and artistic, but yet it was in a language or in a way that spoke to them. And I think that's key and critical.
Does that surprise the kids sometimes, that they actually find themselves interested in this thing they didn't think they were interested in?
Absolutely. I think it shocks them when they realize that, this just isn't my grandmother or my grandfather's music. And they also make the connection to how much of it is just sort of in their everyday lives. They don't realize where they've heard that piece or where they know something from, but but all of a sudden they recognize it because you start helping them see the connections, and then they start asking questions, and it's fantastic.
Great.
Yeah. Sometimes framing something like that in a different way is an easier way to get to students. I think we kind of mentioned that a little earlier, not necessarily just coming out with classical music, but I think a lot of people, especially as they get into high school and stuff, they want to think of like cool music is something they get to find in sort of the underground. It's not something you find from your teachers at school necessarily, but eventually, if they can make that connection and see that all of the elements are there, when you study classical music, it's still going to be a great value to you if you wanted to be in rock or hip-hop or electronic musician of some kind,
You kind of just gravitate back, I guess.
Yeah, so each student has some interest, and, eventually if something connects that interest to the world of classical music, then suddenly there it is for them to enjoy for their life.
Right.
I mean, it's an interesting point because, the reality is that so many rock musicians, pop musicians are classical musicians, classically trained. I mean, I was a cellist with Genesis right at the beginning of the Genesis era when we started in 1969, 1970, because we were all at Guildhall together, Mike Rutherford and Phil Collins and these guys. And the fact is that a lot of, the Beatles, the 60s, the pre-60s was not the case. But once the kind of 70s came, a lot of popular musicians, and it's even more so now, come out of a classical training. And Genesis was the best example because nearly all of the guys in Genesis had come as truly great classical musicians. I mean, Mike Rutherford was a great guitarist, and you know, we was just experimenting with digital and electronic at that time. But yeah, I mean, Phil Collins was a drummer at that time.
Yeah, exactly. Take a moment to remind our audience this is Intersection, a program of KBIA and the Reynolds Journalism Institute. I'm Ryan Famulner. Today we're talking about the opportunities and challenges for youth music education in mid-Missouri. Joining us in studio today for the conversation, Kirk Trevor is the maestro of the Missouri Symphony Society. James Melton is the coordinator of the Fine Arts Department for Columbia Public Schools, and Greg Hausman is the director of the Columbia Academy of Music. We'd also love to hear from you and our audience today. Do your children play music? What are some of the barriers that you experience in accessing that education? Share your thoughts. Give us a call at 573-882-8925 or email intersection@kbia.org. You can also tweet us at IntersectKBIA. We'd like to remind you can watch Intersection as streaming video online during our live conversations every Monday afternoon at 2 at kbia.org. You can also watch that video and join our online chat by going to kbia.org and scrolling down to the link for Intersection. Again, that's Mondays at 2 online at kbia.org. And I would like to get to that topic of barriers here in a moment, but I wondered just quickly, maybe, James, you could talk a little about there is a partnership with the Met Opera that kind of fits into the conversation that we just talked about. We talk a little bit about that.
So I don't know if I came to opera naturally. In fact, I know I didn't. I came to it through a friend when I came down to the University of Missouri. I was always sort of lightly interested in it, but I was more of a musical theater guy and then was going into music ed. But got my early education from a friend who was a Joan Sutherland fan and quickly dived into his recordings and over time just really fell in love with it. So a few years ago, the Metropolitan Opera started their HD Live broadcast series. And that's been going on for 7 or 8 years now after Peter Gelb took over there at the Met. But they started an education series in which they were inviting New York City public schools as well as other regional schools that had the broadcast in a local theater and giving them resources to help prepare kids, much like the young people's concerts, and then taking them to one of those broadcasts. We were selected last year after working with them and kind of signing up to be a Missouri site. They had relatively few schools in the Midwest that were participating. It was mainly East Coast, West Coast thing. Now we have some schools, and we have one in Missouri. We might be adding another. There's a couple in Texas. We have one in Minnesota. But essentially, we choose 4 operas, and we're taking each of the high schools, as well as Lee Elementary, which is our fine arts elementary here in Columbia. And like I'll use Lee as the best example, I think, or one of the most representative of our first year involved. We had 50 tickets available to us to take young students. I went and worked with the 4th and 5th graders to prepare them to see La Cenerentola, which is a lovely Rossini opera, and did some pre-work with them. We even got the opportunity working through the Met to do a live Google Hangout with Joyce DiDonato, which, if you don't know her, is a local Midwest girl who is made great in world-renowned mezzo-soprano, and she made these brilliant connections with kids about what it was like to sing this role for over 17 years, talk about how she got involved, and it was just so real for them. And then we got to go to that performance on Saturday, and what they get to see is the grand spectacle that is opera. It's not this isolated voice that's singing on a recording, which is how I enjoy listening to it, but most people need to see it in its theatrical format, that it's stage and costumes and scenery and great design and great music, and the classical music just comes along for the ride. And now not only have they been exposed to great theater, but now kids are talking about Rossini and the fireworks. And in fact, we're probably going to take Lee again next year to another Rossini opera because the kids were so engaged by these fireworks that go off in the voice ranges. So it's a really exciting partnership. We get to do that with 4 sites, and they're doing it all across the country. And I think it's the mission behind it really is to keep what could potentially be a dying art form not fall off. It is the people's art form. It's for the everyday Joe. They want people, you don't have to dress up in your Sunday's best in order to go to the opera. You can slap on a polo and a nice pair of slacks and show up at the Met and see opera anytime. And they're trying to lower that threshold so that people realize the doors are open, the tickets are available. And so a kid that sees their first HD Live broadcast and then takes a trip to New York later in their life might just show up at the Met to go see, whatever might be showing up there, which is fantastic.
We actually have a caller on the line. I wanted to bring him on real quick. David from Columbia. David, are you there?
I am.
Hi, yeah, thanks for calling today.
Thanks. So I have a comment for the moderator and then a comment/question for the panelists. I
Sure.
think the first thing I would observe is that KBIA is, in fact, quite an asset in these regards in terms of its all-day classical formatting, that this is music that can be listened to while one does anything, and that families can have playing in the presence of their children, just like one of your panelists mentioned the BBC 3 years ago. And that is not common in a city of our size, a town of our size, our small size, and I think that's a great advantage, and I think kudos to the station for doing that.
Well, thank you for
children, too. For the panelists, my curiosity is regarding people who are musicians and children who are learning music and people who are instructors of music all agree on the topics that you've been discussing, and so there's clearly some gap somewhere else, and I'm thinking about things like standardized testing in the schools that don't ever seem to address instrumental music or fine arts performances, and I'm thinking about a legislature which never seems to really talk about those things, and I'm wondering about what kind of contribution the State Department of Education makes, if at all, to the furtherance of these things. And I'm curious about the panelists' notions about governmental support, interest, or even acceptance of a continued focus on these subjects, and what they think might or could be done by citizens or others to help galvanize and aggregate that support.
Great question. Thanks, David.
That would take an hour
I see.
to
That's a
answer.
fantastic
I was gonna
question.
say, well, I think we're going to finish that in the 2 minutes before the break. We'll come back to it too. But James, I saw you nodding throughout that call. David, thanks so much for the question.
I think it's difficult on many levels because there are barriers due to standardized testing and things that we're up against. But I don't really see it as a barrier if we find the ways that we work in tandem and find the ways that we know that we're supporting what are great standards for kids. Quality learning happens all the time, and we need to be accountable for knowing how students and when students have learned. But it's also finding those support pieces that I think is clearly, borne out in research and other things, that music education and fine arts education in general improve what's going on there. I don't know if the connections are as real as some people would like them to be, because they love to see, well, if I take this course, it has this outcome. Well, we can't really base all of education, particularly fine arts education, on some sort of immediate gain in a test score. Because if we try to do that, we'll never find it, to be quite honest. But if we look over the life of what a person gains through study and through understanding and enjoyment, we know that it has an impact on their ability to be a cognitive, great thinking person. So I think in Columbia, we particularly see a lot of support for the fine arts in the public schools. Would we as fine art educators always love there to be more? You betcha. We would like as much time as we could get with students, but we don't suffer from any lack of having access to all kids, especially at the elementary level, and then as we cross into middle school, helping them to find opportunities to get great music education, And I don't know if that's necessarily true statewide.
Well, but I think also the first time I heard about string teachers being cut out of the schools was back in 1970s when I first came to the States, and there was this bemoaning for a number of years because it was tragic, of course, that instrumental teachers were being taken out of elementary schools and band programs were starting later, et cetera, et cetera. But we've kind of had that happening for 30 to 35 years, and I think what's happened is that groups like the symphony, in fact, symphony orchestras, I've been involved with 4 symphony orchestras that have tried to take up the slack.
Unfortunately, I have to interrupt you, but we'll pick that up right after the quick break. Guest today, Kirk Trevor, the Maestro of the Missouri Symphony Society, James Melton, the coordinator of the Fine Arts Department for Columbia Public Schools, and Greg Hausman, the director of Columbia Academy of Music. I'm Ryan Famuliner. We'll be right back after this short break.